Right, good afternoon everyone and welcome to Hypoxia. Thank you to Jeff for inviting me to talk about it. The reason I think he's invited me to talk about it is because I've been the association's medical advisor for quite a few years now. I'm still jumping, I have been since I was 18, I'm still a current pilot, and for about 25 years I was an instructor and held static line tandem and AFF ratings and also jump pilots rating. But I'm quite aware there's probably quite a few people in the room who are a lot more experienced than me in numbers of jumps and an experience of hypoxia and how to avoid hypoxia. And if people feel a need to chime in and add to the conversation, that'll be great. The plan today is to look at what hypoxia actually is, how it affects us, look at how altitude and time play into that, look at how it varies, because it is very variable, and then look at how it affects jumpers and pilots. We've got to do some boring stuff on what the rules are. There'll be a little bit of technical stuff, and I know it's immediately after lunch and everyone's ready for a snooze, and some of the slides will be technical, but if it's a very technical slide and it's too much, don't worry, because I'll sum it up very succinctly at the end of the technical bits. And we'll talk a little bit about prevention and oxygen systems, but it's not really oxygen systems I'm here to talk about today, and there'll be a summary at the end. Well, what is hypoxia? Most people have a cartoon image of what hypoxic skydivers look like, and strangely enough, it's not normally like this. We all need oxygen to work adequately. We need it to function normally and even to stay alive. The term hypoxia comes from hypo meaning low and oxia meaning oxygen, and it just means low oxygen, nothing more than that. We can make it much more complicated than that, but I'm not going to. If we have low oxygen in our tissues, we get poor function, weak muscles, weak brain. And if the oxygen levels get very low, eventually tissues will die, and we can die from hypoxia if it's severe enough. Here comes the first technical bit. We need to be able to talk about air pressure. And when we talk about air pressure, there are all sorts of units we can use to measure it. And if you go away and look this up, you may see any of these units used to measure it. But the only units we're going to really bother with are the mBar or hectopascal, which is put at the end. mBar is used by pilots. The young, cool and groovy pilots now call them hectopascals, but they're still essentially the same thing. When we look at a normal atmosphere, pilots often talk about a standard atmosphere, and in a standard atmosphere the pressure is 1013 millibars or hectopascals. When we look at the physics of the atmosphere, I want you to bear in mind how much oxygen pressure our tissues need to stay alive, and it's normally only about 4 millibars of oxygen pressure in our tissues. When we look at the atmosphere, we'll look at it at ground level, 10,000 feet and 20,000 feet. We also refer to these as flight level 100 and flight level 200. Whatever the flight level is, add a couple of zeros on the end, and that's an approximate altitude. At ground level, we've already mentioned that we're at 1,013 millibars, and 21% of the oxygen, or a fifth of the atmosphere, is 21% of the atmosphere is made up of oxygen. And as we go up to 10,000 feet and 20,000 feet, it's still 21%. That doesn't change at all. What does change is the pressure. And at ground level, we've already said that it's 1,013 millibars. And as we go up to 10,000 feet, that'll drop to about 2/3 of that. And at 20,000 feet, it's just below half of that. But what we actually want to know is, what's the pressure of oxygen? Well, at ground level, it's just over 200 millibars. And as we go up, it drops to 2/3 of that and just under half of that. And if you look at this, you'll see that at 20,000 feet, we've got 98 millibars of oxygen, but we still only need 4 to keep our tissues alive. So why don't we regularly jump at 20,000 feet? Well, the reason is we've got 98 millibars of oxygen in the air around us. But even as it moves into our lungs, water vapor and carbon dioxide displace oxygen, so it's dropping. As it moves from the air part of our lungs into the blood part of our lungs, the oxygen pressure drops further. Due to blood mixing, as it leaves the lungs, it drops further. And when the blood gets to your brain and muscles and the oxygen starts to leave the blood and move into the tissues, it drops further. And as it diffuses through the tissues to the furthest point from the blood vessels, it drops even further. And in fact, even at ground level, by the time we're looking at tissues, the oxygen pressure has dropped to anything between 20 and 65 millibars. Now you might think at 10,000 and 20,000 feet, it'll drop to 2/3 of that and then half of that, so it'll still be well above the 4 millibars. But unfortunately, due to the way the body works, it doesn't do that. And at 20,000 feet, the oxygen pressure in the tissues will have dropped to anything between 1 and 3 millibars in people who aren't used to being at altitude. And that's not enough to sustain life in the long term. You'll stay alive for a short while, but eventually you'll succumb. But that's the oxygen pressure in a fit young person. The initial studies were done on young servicemen who'd been told to volunteer for the studies. And so you got results that were the sign of a young, fit body. But if we were now to take a tandem passenger, let's say an 80-year-old granny who'd smoked most of her life, she's got a bit of emphysema or chronic bronchitis, maybe she had a few fags before she got in the aeroplane to go up, she will achieve that body tissue oxygen pressure of 1 to 3 millibars at 10,000 feet. And if this all seems a bit complicated, the only message you need to take away from this slide is that there is huge variability in how hypoxic people get at any given altitude. There'll be some people who are very well at one altitude and other people who are almost collapsed. We're now going to look at effects, symptoms and signs of hypoxia. These three words mean different things. Effects are whatever hypoxia does to us. Symptoms are what we notice or feel about ourselves. And signs are what other people notice about us. First of all, the effects. We'll look at the physical effects. If you're getting hypoxic, you may notice that you've got less stamina and strength. It's harder to hang on as a front floater. It's harder to shift your 200-pound tandem student down the length of the aircraft fuselage. We'll probably also get more puffed. We'll find ourselves gasping sometimes if we're doing a lot of work at altitude. And we get more clumsy. It gets harder to do up our chin strap. It gets harder to tuck the laterals away into the elastics after we've tightened them. But much more important than that are the mental and behavioural changes. And the most important behavioural or mental change we get with hypoxia is the first one I'm going to mention. And if you only remember this one and no other effects, it's been worth coming. The most important change is we become really stupid. And it doesn't matter if you've been to university and you've got a degree. If you're hypoxic, you're still going to become stupid. But you won't realise that you're being stupid. You don't need to pat him on the shoulder. He already knows. You also get forgetful. You may forget to tighten your laterals. You may forget to close your visor or do up your chin strap. You may forget to do a full check on your student or put their goggles on. You may forget that there's a red line in the aircraft telling you not to go past it because of centre of gravity restrictions. You can forget all sorts of things. You can also forget the whole skydive, so thank goodness you've got video on the way down and you can get a debrief from that afterwards. You'll lose the ability to take the initiative. As an instructor, you'd normally expect to sort problems out in the aircraft, but if you're hypoxic, you'll go, oh look, wow, his chest strap's undone, I wonder if he knows that. And then he'll carry on doing something else instead of intervening and getting his chest strap done up. You'll become overconfident. Yeah, I know the laterals are a bit loose or they're not evenly tightened, but I can hack this. I've done this lots of times before. Oh, I know I'm a bit short of breath, but I'm sure I'll be okay once I get out of the aircraft. Oh, I know the pilot chute feels a bit stiff in the pouch, but I'm sure I'll be able to get it out once I'm out of the aircraft. So you get reckless overconfidence. Sometimes you just stop caring. You'll see the person next to you passed out, and you'll know he's passed out, but you won't care about it or do anything. And you'll get an increased error rate and start to make more misjudgments. And we'll come back to this a little bit later. You'll get slowing and loss of problem-solving ability. So you'll see a problem and lose the ability to deal with it. And finally, you get something called perseveration. That means you'll start to do something and you'll keep on doing it, even if there's no way you're ever going to succeed, and even if there are much more important things you should be getting on and doing. And we'll come back to this too. Symptoms. Right. What's the commonest symptom of hypoxia? Would anyone like to hazard a guess?
Slurred speech.
Slurred speech is a symptom. Yeah, it's not the one I'm looking for.
Blue lips.
Being sleepy, that's
Blue lips.
blue lips. That's more of a sign. You see that in other people.
Loss of vision.
Loss of vision.
It's a colour loss.
Yeah, yeah, you're absolutely right. Loss of colour vision. But it's not the commonest. Sorry, one more.
Like face tingling, hands.
Yeah, absolutely right. Those can all be symptoms of hypoxia. Pardon?
You're happy.
You're happy, yeah, you're content. But it's not the commonest symptom. This slide is already showing the commonest symptom of hypoxia, which is you don't notice anything wrong at all. You're stupid as can be, but you don't know it. You don't feel anything is wrong, and you'll carry on because it feels like a normal skydive. And this is why hypoxia is dangerous. Most people won't even know that they've got it. There are, however, other symptoms. There might be a change in your breathing pattern. You might notice your breathing gets faster and slower as you go up. You will get puffed when you exert yourself, but by then you're already getting out of the airplane. It's too late even to notice it. You may get tingling lips and fingers and toes, often associated with being lightheaded, but those are also symptoms of overbreathing or hyperventilation. And sometimes you're hyperventilating and you're hypoxic at the same time. If you're up at 15 to 16,000 feet and put on an air traffic hold, you might find after 15 to 20 minutes you're feeling awful, you've got a throbbing headache, you're feeling sick, and occasionally people will throw up. You're quite right, colours will seem less sharp. You may think it's getting a bit dark inside the aircraft, but it isn't. Your vision is just fading. Colour vision may go first, and eventually you can get tunnel vision and see less and less in front of you. When you're out of the aircraft, you'll dive down to the formation in no time because you're a skied god, and then you won't be able to see where your slot is. And that's partly because you've lost some of your colour vision. You can't see that nice bright red backpack you were aiming for, and even if you can see it, your brain's lost the ability to recognise the pattern in the formation. And if you're doing sequential, you'll get even more brain locks than you normally do. Signs. Well, the colour quality isn't very great here. This chap's at 18,500 feet without oxygen, and his lips were looking pretty blue at the time. I'm not sure if that really shows through. And coincidentally, he was hypoxic because the pilot had got hypoxic and just kept climbing and didn't realise he was climbing. So you may get blue lips, tongue, nail beds. You may notice people being a bit careless. The instructor doesn't check his student out so well. You may see someone looking a bit clumsy. They're having difficulty doing up their chin strap. As they move down the fuselage, they're having to support themselves more than normal. A few people will be excitable, but most people will just be dopey. A student may not be able to follow your commands. You tell them to put their arms across their chest and take hold of the chest strap. Some of them won't even be able to do that. People may get inappropriate task fixation or perseveration. It might be, I'm going to get out of the aircraft now, and a minute later they're still trying to get out of the door, but they're so hypoxic they can't. The sensible thing would be to lie down and get someone to make the plane descend. You will occasionally see people throwing up, and some people will lose consciousness. And one of the catches is they can lose consciousness several seconds after they've left the aeroplane. In the sky, you may see people making dangerous approaches above or under the formation. There may be collisions or near misses. And you may see some people orbiting around just lost in space, having no idea where they're going. Altitude is important. It makes a difference. Would anyone like to take a guess at what altitude we can actually detect the first signs of hypoxia? Got a bid for £7,000 and £8,000. Any other offers? Well, you can actually assess the first signs of hypoxia at 4,000 feet. And the first sign is you lose your night vision, or your night vision begins to deteriorate. Not a big problem for most of us as skydivers. but it shows some parts of the body are that sensitive to oxygen pressures. Between 8,000 and 10,000 feet, you'll probably notice your breathing pattern changes. You might suddenly think, I haven't breathed for the last half minute, and then you'll start puffing and panting for a short while, and then you'll go back to not breathing for a while. That doesn't mean you're seriously hypoxic, but it does mean your body is recognizing the changes in pressure around you. And in the lab, you can detect there's poorer performance on recently learnt skilled tasks, even at these altitudes. 10 to 12,000 feet, there's poorer performance even on really familiar skilled tasks that you've been practicing for years. It may not normally be disastrously poorer, but it's measurably poorer, and in some professions, it can be dangerously poorer. And as you go higher, everything gets progressively worse. You get errors, slower thinking time, sometimes the inability to think about things. Time is important too, though, because we don't get these hypoxic effects the moment we're at that altitude. You have a little bit of time before they come on. And that time varies tremendously. And you get some of the time because you have some oxygen reserves in your body, in the blood, in the muscle and other tissues, and the alteration in your breathing pattern gives you a little extra time. But eventually you will get there. There are things, though, that can also make hypoxia come on faster. And for instance, prolonged holds in intermediate altitude. You get an air traffic hold at 8,000 feet for 15 minutes. No one thinks they're getting hypoxic at that altitude, but you're getting rid of your oxygen reserve, the bit that gives you that extra few minutes at altitude. If you're the sort of skydiver who likes running up and down the airplane, high-fiving everyone before you get out, you're burning up your last reserves of oxygen there. If you're cold and shivering, you're burning up oxygen. So wear more clothes or get the pilot to spend some more money on fuel and put the heat on. The DZ owners don't like that one. If you're a smoker, carbon monoxide in your blood will help prevent oxygen getting around well. So if you really need your nicotine fix, use gum or a vape or something like that. Recent blood donation can have a similar effect. And there's a list of other things that are going to make your hypoxia come on more rapidly and at a lower altitude. Age is relevant perhaps when we're taking much older students or tandem students. And illness, hunger, fatigue and dehydration play a part as well. And we can mention COVID here. If you had bad COVID in the last couple of months, your lungs may not be doing such a good job, and you too may be more likely to become hypoxic, even at our normal jump altitudes. Some people worry about wearing masks to prevent the spread of COVID, and will that make me hypoxic? The sort of masks most people wear have no ability to make you more hypoxic. Some really tight masks could make you minimally more hypoxic if you're running a 400-metre race. But for people sitting in an aircraft cabin, that shouldn't be a problem. Right, I'm going to bring up some personal experience of hypoxia here because it may illustrate some of the points I've made already. I went to the Royal Naval Air Medical School many years ago and went in their pressure chamber and was taken up to 25,000 feet on oxygen. And it's perfectly comfortable while you're on the oxygen. And first of all, two people took off their masks and they had to do a sort of pat-a-cake pattern. So clap, knees, pat, clap, knees, pat. And after about a minute, they were occasionally getting the order wrong. And after about 2 minutes, they were actually missing their hands when they were trying to clap. And at 2.5 minute stage, they'd actually forgotten what they were there for and weren't able to do anything at all. Mask went back on, they were soon okay. The next pair took off their masks and they had to do a writing test. And within about a minute, their writing was beginning to get a bit scribbly. A minute and a half, you couldn't even read it. And at about the 2 minutes phase, one of the guys was holding up his pen, looking at it and wondering what you did with a pen. And someone said to him, put your mask back on, put your mask back on. And he wouldn't. So someone started to put his mask back on for him. And he was pushing them off because he wanted to keep looking at this pen and figure out what it was for. Well, I'd been watching this and I knew I wasn't going to be that stupid. So when my mask came off, I was given some mental arithmetic. Start with 100, take away 7, and keep on going till there's nothing left. And in no time at all, I was down to 2, which was the right answer, by the way. And so I was given my 12 times table to do. And I've been able to do this since I was 6 years old. I thought, this is really easy. 12, 24, 36, 48, 60. I couldn't think what came after 60. So I thought, well, let's break it down and make it easy. Take 60, add on 12. I couldn't do it. So I thought, right, let's make this really easy. Take 60, then add on 10, then add on 2. I couldn't do it. I really couldn't. I thought, what on earth's going on here? And in a flash, suddenly it came to me, oh, 72, 84, 96, 102. I couldn't think what came after 102. So I went through that same process of trying to add stuff on. But then I got really clever and thought, well, was I right with 102? Is that a multiple of 12? Well, it's got a 1 in it like a 12, and it's got a 2 in it like a 12. So it's got to be a multiple of 12, which of course it wasn't. And in the meantime, there's someone at the side of me saying, put your mask back on, put your mask back on. Well, I told him to F off because I was doing my 12 times table. And at this point, someone was putting my mask back on, and I was pushing him away because I wanted to sort out my 12 times table. And some short time later, it suddenly came to me, oh, it wasn't 102, was it? It was 108. So 120, 132, 144, 156, and so on. So, and that illustrates how you can know all about hypoxia. You've been briefed on it. You've seen other people going hypoxic. And yet a few minutes later, you're as stupid as they were. We're now going to go on to watch a bit of video and see how many of the hypoxic effects you can spot in this video. It's a very old video. Some of you will have seen it before. Quality isn't great, but it illustrates a lot of what can happen. It's the guy in the red jumpsuit to pay attention to. I'm going to switch the noise off for a moment. If you keep looking at the guy in the red jumpsuit, he's clearly distressed. His mask has come off. The guy with the camera with the yellow arm keeps pointing at him, and you see the guy on the right there go, so what? You can see he's lying back, semi-conscious, falling against the guy next to him, who's doing nothing to help him. The guy on the right thinks that he's clearly mentally deranged. He's just tapping his helmet like this. There's a shortcut now, and clearly you won't be getting out, will he? Oh no, someone's put his mask back on. And if you look at him, even though he's got a mask on, there are still problems. I think his goggles are around his neck. The guy with the camera can see there's still a problem. And if you look at the guy, he's clearly having difficulties. He's leaning backwards and forwards. The nice person on the left here is trying to help him with his mask, but in doing so, she's dropped her own mask and is becoming more hypoxic. I think his mask is tangled on his helmet chin strap as well. You can see her mask is falling off as she's putting it back on. Now, if you watch the person with the red rig moving down the aircraft, you'll see that they're having to hang on fairly carefully just to keep their balance. They're moving quite slowly, their legs aren't working as well as they want to, and the guy who's going to jump with her is moving down the aircraft, and I think his oxygen has just come unplugged at this point because he's hanging onto his mask to get that last gasp. And now that he gets down to the end, you're going to see he hasn't even got enough strength in his legs to stand up, not enough coordination to do anything. And if you think about how much time has gone past, think about how far past the drop zone they are at this point. But this is what's called perseveration. I'm going to get out of the airplane. And remember, these aren't idiots. They're normal skydivers like you and me who are hypoxic.
I mean, this is outrageous.
Was that you in yellow?
Eh?
Was that you in yellow?
That was a wonderful fact.
He's almost like a beetle on his back at the moment, not able to move. And you'll see she's helpfully putting a foot underneath his backside to try and help him out the door.
Walter, just get out.
And, of course, it's not doing much harm to his pins at the moment, is it?
Oh, I need this video. Wow.
Now, the guy who was doing the filming woke up in the aircraft on the way down. He didn't even get round to jumping. The guy who fell out of the door woke up in free fall in time to open his canopy, but remembered nothing of the jump whatsoever. Right, we're going to look at another jump at a similar height of 21,000 feet. And this one's a bit shorter. And these guys, there's 4 or 5 guys sharing 2 or 3 oxygen masks, intermittently using them. You'll see they're not happy or worried. They're not unhappy or worried by the lack of oxygen. So, oh, it's my turn with the oxygen mask now. Pass it over. Here you are, dude. And the reason I'm showing you this will become apparent after they leave the aircraft. I spent lots of time hanging up the oxygen rather than breathing from it. Right, they've got out of the aircraft. Look at the one who was out first, who's highest up in the screen. They're doing a head-up jump. It's going quite nicely. There's nice sit positions, sitting opposite each other. And now, about 10 seconds after leaving the aircraft, he's suddenly lost control. He's flailing on his back. He's semi-conscious. He's lost the ability to control his arms and legs and do anything in a coordinated way with them. He's lost the ability to even realise quite which way up he is or what's happening. And this goes on for most of the jump, and his friends eventually manage to catch him and dump him out. Whether he was unconscious or just unaware, it doesn't really matter. He wasn't able to function safely. So the fact that you're able to walk to the door and get out doesn't mean you're fit to do the skydive. Right, so you did get out of the door okay, you swoop down to the formation and you look for that brightly coloured rig that you knew you had to dock beside, and suddenly you can't make it out. And you could on all of the dirt dives, it wasn't a problem, but now you can't. And that's because you're mildly hypoxic. And if you'd used the oxygen properly or got out 2,000 or 3,000 feet later, 2,000 or 3,000 feet lower, then the dive would have looked like this instead, and you'd have found it easier to find where you were going. Mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. I don't need to get hypoxic to make mistakes. I can do that at ground level and regularly do as well. And I imagine most other people here do too. The thing about hypoxia is it makes you more likely to make mistakes. You'll make more of them. You'll be less likely to realise that you've made a mistake. And even if you do realise you've made a mistake, you'll be less likely to be able to solve the problems you've caused and get out of the situation in a safe and timely manner. The mistakes might be just mildly embarrassing, like forgetting to close your visor before you get out of the aircraft, and we can all have a laugh about it. They might be slightly more embarrassing in that you forget to undo your restraint before you leave the aircraft. And that's certainly worth a round of beers as long as nothing goes wrong.
With the wingsuit on.
Yeah. Or you might swoop down to the formation and find when you get there that you can't see quite where you want to be. Even if you can see the colours, it doesn't look right. And that's because you're miles off level and you don't even realise it. When you see the video later on, it was obvious you're off level, but at the time you don't realise it. And you may come in and try and take a grip way off level, funnel the formation in your efforts. And it's not that you don't know that you should be on level, you no longer have the ability to appreciate it. It may be that when you leave the aircraft, you don't put as much effort into your exit as you'd want to. And so you tumble. And then, because you've already got it fixed in your mind that you're going to set your drogue 2 seconds after exit, you set your drogue 2 seconds after exit, even though you're still tumbling. It's perseveration. I'm going to set the drogue, rather than assessing your situation and reacting appropriately. That did have a safe outcome in the end, by the way. However, look at this tandem instructor. Did he check that his student was well attached before he got out of the aircraft? Neither of the main attachment points are done up. The student's attached only by his laterals. I mean, it sends a chill down my spine every time I look at this photograph, and I've looked at it loads. But you would think that you would A, remember to do up those hooks, and B, you would actually think to check that you'd done them up. And you can see there's even a safety pin that you have to check you've put in as well. And you might hope the camera person had actually seen that the student wasn't hooked on. But the more hypoxic you are, the more likely you are to end up in situations like this, which look quite incredible, but which still occur. We're now going to have a video of another tandem, and it'll take me just a moment to set this up because this one won't work adequately through. Right, this one won't go on for very long. If you look at the tandem instructor's exit, you might think this wasn't the ideal exit. In the end, he manages to sort things out. We can go back and look at what went wrong in a moment or two. A rather weak exit. And you can see the G-force building up already. And this can rapidly get to the point where you can actually black out from the G-force. And in the end, he does the only thing that's open to him and dumps his reserve, and with one or two twists. And we're going to go back in this for just a few frames. And you can see when he left the aircraft, he didn't really make a good, stable spread and a big body arch, did he? In fact, it was exactly the opposite. He's in a complete reverse arch. And when we get to look at the spin, look at the laterals. Look at how much the laterals have given or weren't tightened in the first place. So in the aircraft, he didn't get things as ready as he could have done, and he made virtually no effort on the exit. And of course, it may just be that it was just confidence. I can handle any amount of slack laterals. I can keep things stable. I don't need to put much effort in. But the higher you go, the more likely you are to be negligent in the way you get yourself ready for exit and negligent in the way you exit. And it's not just about looking after your student, it's about looking after yourself as well. You lose care even for yourself when you're hypoxic. We've had a technology failure here. The mouse has given up. Yeah, I'm just about to do that. The mouse wasn't moving to begin with. That's better. Right, we're going to look at some other videos. And remember, we can all make these mistakes at any time, but hypoxia makes us much more likely to make them. Let's look at approaches to formations. Oh, jeez.
Even I can't get on it.
Right, this is at 16 or 17,000 feet. Oxygen had been used, but perhaps not as well as it could have been. And you're going to see two things. You're going to see a collision, and after the collision, which looks hard enough, just keep looking to the right. There's the collision. Keep looking to the right. Probably a slightly faster pass than you'd want to make, but you don't have to be a free flyer to do things like that. And we'll get the glory of that in slow motion. You'll see one helmet lost and two cameras lost on this one. And he's lucky he didn't break his neck going through like that because his head was extended right back. Again, we can all make mistakes like this. Now, this guy in the distance is quite keen to meet up with one of his mates.
Ooh.
That was a really serious hit. Of course, tracking is a danger zone at the best of times. And you could actually hear the scream on the video when that guy went past. Let's look at pilots, because we often think about hypoxia in skydivers, but pilots are an important part of our consideration. This guy's about to go up to 16,500 feet as a pilot, and he's already got nasal prongs in his nose because he knows oxygen is a good thing. Pilots have a lot of important things to do. Some of them are fairly easy: running in the right direction, running at the right height, running at the right airspeed. Airspeed's important. Too fast and you're all going to whinge if you're the front floater. Too slow and the aircraft is more likely to stall and spin and scare you. The pilot has to remember to put down the flaps on a lot of aircraft. Putting down the flaps allows him to fly more slowly without stalling, and it also allows the tail of the aircraft to be higher, so your wingsuiters and taller jumpers are less likely to crack their head on the tailplane. But if the pilot forgets the flaps, that increases your hazard level. If you're flying in formation, the pilot has to be able to fly close enough to make sure everyone gets together, but not so close that he hits the other aircraft. And during the exit, the pilot has to be able to control the aircraft despite anything between 1/4 of a ton and 2 tons of skydivers all suddenly moving to the rear of the aircraft and then hanging on the outside on one side, which makes the aircraft really want to stall and spin. And it takes a considerable amount of skill, experience and mental processing to do this safely. The pilot has to look at the horizon. He has to look at 3 or 4 instruments inside the aircraft. He has to feel the response in the controls. He has to plan ahead, notice tiny changes in the way the aircraft is flying, and do lots of things to stop it going out of control. And this is the sort of highly skilled task which is affected by hypoxia even at relatively low levels. And in the military, for instance, you're on oxygen from 10,000 feet up because the military know they're going to lose an awful lot of expensive airplanes if they don't do that. And of course, the pilot also has to be able to recover from a stall or spin if he does lose control. And some pilots, when they're hypoxic, will just make the wrong inputs once they've stalled and spun. And finally, even if everything goes well on the drop, he has to make sure he doesn't hit anyone on the way down. When you look out the tailgate of a Skyvan and you see another aircraft flying close enough so you can see the rivets on the wing, and so you can see the large food processor on the wing, then you know the pilot's doing quite a skilled job, and you want to keep him doing that skilled job well. So we're going to have a video now, and can I ask the recording camera to be switched off? Right, we're going to see some more videos. Now again, pilots can make mistakes, and sometimes it's the jumper's fault. Too many move to the rear of the aircraft. But what I want you to get out of these next few videos is the risk this poses to the jumpers, and sometimes the risk it poses to the pilot when things go wrong. You'll see the nose of the aircraft going up, and then it'll go into a spin. And the thing to watch for is not the fact that he does quite a good spin, which would win an aerobatic competition, but watch where he goes when he recovers. See where the skydivers are? Yeah. And he's going almost underneath the skydivers. He's just dropped, and he's still not in control. He's getting imminent spins from side to side. Look for another skydiver getting out now. It's taking that long to get out. This next one.
Oh, no, I'm off.
Right. The jumpers haven't moved to the rear of the aircraft. The pilot's lost control on the run-in. They're being quite calm, but you can see he's spinning at the moment. And I'll have the sound back on. They're taking their time opening the door and getting out. And it's okay to begin with, but then suddenly it becomes difficult for people to get out, and they get pinned down. And this is another view from inside. Watch how the G-force comes on and pins them to the floor all of a sudden. See, they're all pinned down. And this is under canopy now. And if you look carefully, you'll see part of the airplane coming down past them. Part of the tailplane's come off. So he was really quite lucky he got that plane down. Not in one piece, but in a safe piece. On this one, look at which way up the airplane it's halfway through. the ground is on the right. The airplane is fully upside down. These planes aren't designed to fly upside down. And look what it's like inside. Imagine you're there with a tandem passenger following a large group out. This is another view from inside the aircraft, and even these solo guys are finding it really difficult to get out of the airplane. And as they do get out, they go right past the tailplane, or in the case of some of them, right into the tailplane. And one final one, which some of you may have seen before, why it's important for the pilot to have a good assessment of his own abilities on the way down.
Wow.
The tandem passenger was totally unaware of any of this going on. She was having a great time. I mean, how he didn't come to be food processed or cut in half by the tailplane, I just don't know. See, there's no drogue attached anymore, so the reserve's coming out. As I said, she's having a great time. So, after all the excitement, let's move on to some more boring stuff. Right, hypoxia is quite variable. It's variable in the height it comes on, the time it comes on, the type and extent of effects, and there's great variability in our ability to recognise hypoxia in ourselves or in other people. All of that variability, though, does lead to a further problem, and that is, because it's very variable, we'll do recurrent jumps without any obvious problems. And because of that, we'll gradually push the limits and go a bit higher and a bit higher and a bit higher. Now, I don't know any skydiver who doesn't love it when the pilot gives me 500 more feet than I've paid for. But the reality is, when we were only jumping at 10,000 feet, you could happily get the pilot to add on a couple of thousand feet and it would be great. Now we're jumping at 15,000 feet. If the pilot does add on significant amounts, you do suffer eventually. Because we gradually push the limits, we may even get the impression that I don't suffer from hypoxia, it's just those other bad skydivers who get it. And we've got a name for this process. It's called the normalisation of deviance, and eventually it leads to problems. You can overcome some of this sometimes with hypoxia training. You can do what's called hypobaric training, where you all sit in a pressure chamber and they pump air out till you're at 25,000 feet and you take your masks off. And you then get to do a task to see how well you can do that. And these guys have all taken their masks off at the same time, but look at the guy second from right in the sort of red t-shirt with the white lettering on it. Whoops, let's go back. That's not playing properly. Give me a moment. We're all having to try and write down the symptoms. Guy second from the right, you see he's getting a little bit incoordinate, he's twitching a little bit, finding it hard even to hold the board upright.
Okay, number 4, you need to put
And suddenly from looking okay, within 10 seconds, he's unconscious. Everyone else is fine, they're carrying on. Not everyone gets hypoxic at the same time. He's on 100% oxygen now, high flow rates, but he doesn't recover straight away. It takes time to get over hypoxia. His eyes aren't open yet, and we'll move on because it takes him, see, he's actually having a spasm that looks almost like an epileptic seizure at that point, but in fact, it's just hypoxic spasms. We'll move on from that because it just goes on for ages. So, there are hazards in doing hypobaric training. You can do normobaric training in a room at ground level where everyone watching you and looking after you is breathing normal air, but you're fed oxygen depleted air through a mask. And you can do a written task or try and fly a flight simulator while you're oxygen deprived. And that can teach you to recognise symptoms of even mild hypoxia in yourself. And of course, you can learn by personal experience. Go abroad to some drop zones where you drop at 17,000 feet above sea level and everyone's yahooing and burning up their oxygen in the aircraft. And you may get hypoxic yourself and learn from that. You may see other people being dangerously hypoxic. And the more experience of it you get, the less you want to do it. This training has certain limitations though, because when you're a skydiver in the aircraft, you're normally sitting quite still and not getting an opportunity to know how hypoxic you are until you get out of the aircraft, and then it's too late to know how hypoxic you are. Recovery during the descent. You might think, well, I'm a bit hypoxic, the best thing to do is to get out of the airplane and get down quickly. Unfortunately, you've already seen you can lose consciousness after leaving the aircraft, and when you leave the aircraft, you're burning energy with your muscles and you're consuming oxygen faster than your lungs can take it in. Significant time is taken to recover, and you may actually be down to a critical decision height, such as 5,000 feet in a tandem, and still not be fully recovered from bad hypoxia. You may think I've got an AAD, it doesn't matter if I lose consciousness. Of course it matters. If you go into a fast backspin, you can spin so fast that you're brain damaged or killed by the G-force long before your AAD fires. And there's also a thing called the oxygen paradox. Some people actually become more unwell for several seconds after they get more oxygen. So you can actually be worse before you get better. So what do you think you ought to do if you're in the aircraft and you think you're hypoxic, or you think the person next to you is hypoxic? Who'd like to be brave and make a suggestion? Get the plane down as quickly as you can. I think that's the right answer. Is there anything else you can do?
Nobody jump.
Nobody jump,
Nobody
great.
jump.
That's the right answer. Anything else? Pardon?
Ask the pilot to descend.
Yes, rapid descent from the pilot. Anything else?
If there is access to oxygen, provide them oxygen.
Great.
Not take
Yeah.
your own, obviously, but
Yeah, never take your own off, never take your own off. But if there's an oxygen cylinder there, get them onto it. You stay in the aircraft, ask for immediate descent, ask for oxygen if available. No one jumps. Well, if everyone else is okay, why shouldn't they jump? Well, they might be hypoxic as well and not know it, and it delays getting the aircraft down. And I'll tell you, if you've ever been in an aircraft and said, I want to come down, we're getting hypoxic, you're not Mr. Popular, I can tell you that. But it's important to take the lead and do that at times. Sorry, technical again. We've got to talk about height, altitude and flight level. Height is your vertical distance above the drop zone, and it's what your altimeter shows. Altitude is the vertical distance above sea level, and unless you're at a sea level drop zone, it's not what your altimeter shows. And finally, there's flight level. And flight level 150, or 15,000 feet, is wherever the air pressure is 572 millibars. Now, if at your drop zone the air pressure is 1,013 millibars, the standard pressure, then 15,000 feet above the drop zone is flight level 150. But if you're at a drop zone that's 500 feet above sea level and the air pressure on that day is low, your altimeter may show 13,500 feet when you're already at flight level 150. If you're at a sea level drop zone and it's a high pressure day, your altimeter may read nearly 16,000 feet when you're only at flight level 150. I'm going to miss the next two slides because we're running out of time and they're too complicated after lunch anyway. So, what does all of that mean? It means that parachutist altimeters cannot indicate flight level. They usually indicate height above the DZ. And pilot altimeters can indicate flight level. Also, parachutists aren't required to carry a timepiece to measure time at altitude, but pilots must carry a timepiece. They're required by air law to do it. And this leads us into some of the regulatory framework. To understand the regulatory framework, you need to read all of these documents. They cross-refer to each other. They're a little bit complex in places, but they lead to a rule set. And for skydivers, the rule set is up to 12,000 feet, there are no particular rules. Between 12,000 and 15,000 feet, the rules are no more than 30 minutes above 10,000 feet without oxygen and no more than 6 minutes above flight level 120 and not above flight level 150 at any point. Now, why on earth do we use flight levels instead of just what's on your altimeter? The reason is, if we use flight level 150, we know the air pressure will be 572 millibars, so we know exactly what the oxygen pressure will be, and therefore we've got a fixed risk of hypoxia at that flight level. That's why we choose this awkward way of measuring it. There are separate rules for pilots. Have I got any pilots here? Who'd like to volunteer the rules for pilots in the UK? No?
Definitely me.
Isn't there an oxygen if they're above, I don't know, say 12,000 feet or something? There's a point, is it 10?
Yeah, you're quite close. First, if you're in the military, you'll be on oxygen at 10,000 feet. But for civilian pilots, you have to use oxygen if you're above 10,000 feet for more than 30 minutes. Well, unless it's in a piston air van, it's not going to take you that long to get to altitude. But if you're above 13,000 feet, your pilot must be on oxygen. It's not advice, it's a must. Lots of aviation bodies recommend pilots to be on oxygen if they're above 10,000 feet. It's not mandatory, but it is mandatory above 13,000 feet. And the pilot, in law, is legally responsible for monitoring the skydiver limits as well as complying with his own oxygen regulations. Will anyone know if the pilot doesn't monitor those levels? Will they know if he takes you up to flight level 160, 16,000 feet, or if you spend 20 minutes up there? Or will it be a secret kept between you, the other jumpers and the pilot? Does anyone know the answer to that?
Is there something called flight radar where people can monitor?
You've been looking at my slides. Anybody can have a free app on their phone or iPad called NATS Airspace Explorer or Flight Radar 24. And this is what it looks like. This is one I took a few days ago from Langer Airfield, their caravan. Aircraft registration, you can see over on that side, it says it's come from Langer Airfield. It tells you that there are 12,075 feet on the standard pressure setting, flight level 120. So anyone with a mobile phone can see what height you're dropping at. They can see how long you're at heights. And this radar data is stored for several years afterwards. So any of the regulatory bodies, such as the CAA, can go to this at any time and see exactly what you've been doing at your drop zone. So when it's a low pressure day and you're at a high drop zone and the pilot says, we can't go any higher, we're at flight level 150 and your altimeter is only showing 13,500 feet, it's no good being peed off with the pilot. He's just trying to comply with the law because his license is at risk if he breaks it and takes you higher. And equally, if your altimeter shows 16,000 feet, it may not be you've got a generous pilot. It might just be it's a high pressure day and you're at a low level drop zone and he's still only at flight level 150. I have to say, I suspect a lot of our pilots aren't fully familiar either with the oxygen rules or with the skydiving rules. Bear in mind, any pilot can make a mistake. Skydivers contribute to aircraft going out of control even at low level. But if you want the safest aircraft ride you can possibly get, make sure your pilots know about these rules and that you do have a pilot oxygen cylinder in the aircraft and that it's used. Skydiver oxygen systems, and I'm 2 or 3 minutes past my time, I won't go on much longer, I promise. Over on the right you can see some typical Skydiver oxygen systems. They're very high tech. Shove this tube in your mouth and breathe from it. And in the middle of the group of 3 you can see someone who's too cool for school and doesn't believe he even needs to use it because he's a cool skydiver who doesn't need oxygen. He'll probably be the one who bombs the formation, mind you. There's no uniform standard. They're really primitive, very variable effectiveness, There are lots of undetected failures because there's a kink in the tube and nobody notices they're not getting any oxygen. Most of the skydivers that use them, don't understand how to get the best out of them. And unfortunately, some of the experienced organisers who give the oxygen briefing clearly don't understand them either. They're also abandoned too early before the exit. You can go on to more complex systems like this where you have an oxygen cylinder on the front and you have a mask, but the mask can actually reduce your field of vision. And if you think about tumbling after exit, just imagine your bridle hooking around that oxygen cylinder or regulator and think of how much of a mess it can make of things. And if you do want to jump at higher altitude, you have to get STC and CAA approval. Last slide. Assume hypoxia is a risk on any jump where you're above 10,000 feet. Do all you can to mitigate it by being calm in the aircraft. Make sure you drink and eat enough. Don't smoke. Don't go for long holes. If you think there might be a hold, keep the aircraft on the ground. Make sure your pilots know what these rules are and make sure they have oxygen available. And try to stick to the flight level and time limits, because otherwise your pilot's at risk of losing his licence. Remember, even if you're a cool dude who doesn't get hypoxia, it may not be your hypoxia that causes your death. It may be someone else's hypoxia that causes your death. Right, that's it. Thank you very much.
No, thank you.